everyone, and welcome to this episode of Writer's Infusion. I'm your host, Susan. I'm here with Dave, Jen, Julie, and Ed. And we are here to read a literary novel excerpt from New Jersey. It's called Retribution, a Cape Cod love story by Chris Piccone. I am going to read the summary, and then Julie will read the story for us. When Anthony Mancuso falls in love with Liz, a wealthy femme fatale on Cape Cod, the native college student straps himself into an emotional roller coaster that leads him to realize how far he will go for love.
Chapter 1. Each spring, thousands of college students migrate to Cape Cod in a frenzied hunt for summer work. They descend upon the managers of every restaurant, hotel, and ice cream shop, from Sandwich to Provincetown, like ravenous gulls diving into a bait ball. Once employment is secured, the excited students begin a frantic search for lodging, often cramming themselves with 15 to 20 other wild young partiers into the small cottages of the skinny peninsula. Then they spend the rest of their lives reminiscing over these summer memories, bringing their families to the Cape for a week's vacation and trying to recapture that summer feeling. As a year-rounder, I never worried about a summer job or having to sleep on a dirty floor. I lived with my parents in Pocasset, the first town off the Bourne Bridge, and with half a semester left of college, I remained debt-free by working year-round as a delivery driver for the Lobster Pound Fish Market. Waking at 4 each morning and finishing deliveries in time for classes kept money in my pocket and me away from the vices so common to the weathered few who haunted the Cape past tourist season. But the Pounders' owners sold out to a land developer, and the little market was now closed. After 3 years of employment, I faced May 1990 with $124 in my bank account and no leads for any full-time work. Leaving my journalism class on Thursday afternoon, I thought of where I would look for jobs. I avoided I-95, preferring the slower route through the sleepy fishing villages of Fairhaven, Mattapoisett, and Rochester. The depression and hollow loneliness that haunted me through the Cape's dark winter had lessened as the days grew longer and lighter, and I felt optimistic as I drove home. I stopped at the Wareham Playhouse, hoping to find my friend Heather, the Playhouse manager. During my first winter, I had trouble adjusting to the desolate Cape in winter, and the counselor I'd seen recommended getting involved in something. The little theater helped battle the depression that slunk into me after the tourists drove over the bridges, and only the plaintive cries of seagulls remained. Heather, who worked at the Christmas tree shop, had promised to look for jobs in one of her company's Cape stores, but I would have to catch up with her later. The Playhouse's lot was empty. Over the Bourne Bridge, with its 8-foot-high fencing, I thought of the suicides so many of the Cape's year-rounders attempted after drinking or drugging at such low-ceilinged bars as the Whaleback and the Port of No Recall. I, too, had called the Good Samaritan hotline on a frozen January night during my first Cape winter. Driving up Shore Road, my anxiety built at the thought of my father's disappointment if I told him I remained jobless much longer. A career Air Force officer, Colonel Mancuso, had been heavy-handed and acid-tongued when his expectations weren't met, and around him I always felt I was walking on eggshells. I knew I would find a job, but I worried that it wouldn't be good enough to satisfy him. All was quiet on my street, and my parents' driveway was empty. The retired neighbors were playing bridge at the rec center or finishing their 3-hour lunches at the Corner Cup across from St. Brendan's Catholic Church. My brother had an hour left of school, and my parents were still at work. Our shingled ranch facing south never held warmth, and the lack of windows on either end kept the Cape's summer breezes out. 4 years ago, with my father retiring from the military, my parents bought the house in a panic. We were living in New Jersey, but with my grandmother's health failing, my parents packed up the family the summer I graduated high school and moved us into the home a month before I began commuting to the nearby university. My grandmother, who lived 4 miles away, died 3 months later. Wearing black and mourning for weeks, my parents lamented my grandmother's passing like the pious, melodramatic Roman Catholic Sicilians they were, and their home reflected the hard stoicism to which they held firm. Spindly, darkly stained colonial furniture and thick European antiques collected from their travels gave the home a cold, museum-like stagnation. Heavy brass bongs of the Art Deco grandfather clock in the breezeway suggested the tramp of time, yet the home remained a mausoleum where life stood still as a testament to firm puritanical resolve against a hostile world. In the quiet of the kitchen, I made a sandwich and read through the day's Cape Cod Times. Even the Cape was feeling the 1990 recession, and the Help Wanted section offered little for summer employment. On weekends, I still waited tables at Canalside, the restaurant overlooking the eastern mouth of the Cape Cod Canal, but my father wouldn't stand for me working only 2 shifts a week. He believed money flowed from the pockets of the seersuckered tourists, and according to him, a portion of that money needed to funnel into my pocket. I headed to Falmouth, and by 5 o'clock I had filled out applications from 3 hotels and 4 restaurants. "Come back in a couple of weeks," the sallow-eyed managers told me after glancing at my applications. But I knew they didn't want me. I lived 20 minutes north, just off the main artery onto the Cape. They knew I would be battling traffic every day to get to work. I pulled into my parents' driveway just as the last of the afternoon light began to fade. Supper would be ready, and my father would be expecting results. The front door slammed, and the pudgy figure of my brother came out to greet me. 7 years younger, Vinny, in the pimply-faced full throes of puberty, was my scout, reporting on my father's mood before I entered the home. "Hey, bro," Vinny welcomed, voice cracking. "Find a job?" "Nothing yet. How's Dad?" "Fine. Downstairs watching the news," Vinny answered. "He's in a good mood." "I'm trying, Vinny. I really am." We walked into the kitchen where our mother stooped over the stove. "Hello, Anthony. Good to see you," greeted my mother. At 43, she reveled in the role of martyr, long ago resigning herself to suffering through life and expecting little else. Overweight and passive, she had adopted the slow amble of acceptance. Her dreams of driving a Mercedes convertible down Cranberry Highway, a distant memory she repeated often to ensure we all understood what she gave up to raise 2 boys. "How did it go today?" she asked. 7 applications. We'll see. It's in God's hands now," Mom replied. "Sal, time to eat." "Anything today, Anthony?" my father asked as he sat down at the kitchen table. "Some leads," I answered before we all bowed our heads. "Dear Lord, thank you for these gifts which we are about to receive and the family gathered before us tonight. In Jesus' name we pray," recited my father as he had done ever since I could remember. "And please help Anthony in his search," my mother added. "Have you spoken to Mr. Lorette at the post office yet?" asked my father before I had a chance to pass the pasta bowl. "Dad, I told you the post office doesn't hire summer help." "I know what you told me," he snapped. "I just don't understand why it's taking so long." "I'm trying," was my only response. "Your friend Jim found a job at the marina yesterday," my father continued. "I saw his mother at church last night." "Jim's uncle works at the marina. He got Jim the job," I answered. I became irritated as my parents picked apart my job hunting attempts, but I held my frustration, afraid an outburst would only set my father off. "Are you looking in the right places at the right times?" asked Mom. "You see me looking through the papers, coming back with applications." Always suspicious, my father looked at me as he pushed a stalk of broccolini around with his fork. 20 years as an Air Force officer created a demanding parent whose expectations of his sons never seemed attainable. "I told my professors I was going to miss class tomorrow," I announced. Dad stopped moving his food around his plate to look for a job. "That a good idea?" Dad stated more than asked. School had been a sensitive subject since the 2nd semester of my freshman year when I enrolled in only Tuesday and Thursday classes, thinking I could balance my studies and full-time work. I earned 4 Ds and 1 B in the eagle-eye vigil of my father, who never let me forget my failure. "What else can I do?" I asked. "I can't make people hire me." "Well, I guess that's that," he declared before rising with his plate in hand. As expected, I cleared the table and helped my father wash the dishes while my brother rumbled downstairs to do homework. Mom followed him to fold laundry. "Where are you going tomorrow?" Dad asked. "Down Cape, Hyannis, Yarmouth, Chatham. Something's got to be around there." "Don't be picky. When I was your age, I worked the tobacco fields in Connecticut," he began. "It wasn't easy." "I know, Dad. You told me. Right now, I'll take anything." "So many businesses are understaffed in the summer. They have to bring in all those Europeans," he said, shaking his head. "I just don't understand why you can't talk one of these places into hiring you." I knew where he was headed. Whenever my father waited in line too long at a checkout or had slow service at a restaurant, he blamed young people for being too uppity to take the menial jobs. Now he had an unemployed college son, the very scapegoat he had blamed so frequently in the past.
Good job. Good job reading.
Thank you.
I always like the inflections. So I just want to start this off by saying I think the writing's good. I didn't find much fault with the writing itself. I think my main starting point here is that I felt like by reading the summary at the beginning, where it's supposed to be some kind of a romance or something, I never would have seen any hint of that in what we've read so far. And what we've read so far, most of it is a summary. And I'm wondering how much of that summary is really important to where the story's going. I really don't know where the story's going at this point. So should I keep going, or does someone want to?
No, just to give an example of what you're saying. So the whole thing about going to the playhouse to meet his friend Heather, is any of that relevant at this point? It might be relevant later.
Because nobody's there.
But it's not relevant yet. So cut it.
I said push it later.
Yeah, push it later. Let's does it matter about the retired neighbors? Probably not. Get rid of it and let's again get to the heart of the story faster.
Right.
You don't need all the backstory. I think his depression and all that is probably significant. So leave that stuff there. But the other thing that I was confused about was that he said he was a year-rounder, and then later you realize, but he hasn't always been a year-rounder.
Yes.
And that was very confusing to me, because then he said, my first winter here, and I'm thinking, well, wasn't your first winter here when you were a baby? So he doesn't explain it until later that he's only been there for about 4 years.
Right.
So that was confusing me as I went along until, I forget what page he does explain it.
And there were lots of opportunities for starting before he did. The first scene that we really see is when he's sitting at the table with his family. And maybe that's relevant, maybe that's where you want to start, I don't know. And I have a comment about that one too. But there is a comment about how he called Good Samaritans once. That's that's huge.
That's important.
Right? That's really important.
Yeah.
So where does that
jump off a bridge,
Right, that's important. And the whole thing with Heather, I mean, that could have been a scene. Maybe that would have led us somewhere.
Yes.
That's what I was thinking. That's what I wrote down in a number of places here. Like several of the things that he mentions, they could be scenes. I mean, when he talks about seeing, going to some of these places to look for jobs and getting applications, he just sums it up. Come back in a couple of weeks. That could be a scene, and that could be a painful scene that gives us an idea of what he's actually doing and what he's going through in trying to trying to get a job.
By these
Even in the scene with the parents, there's also no. I don't. First of all, I don't feel like I know him at all. So I almost feel like I'm not empathetic with the character because there's nothing there for me to really identify with. And even when you leave that scene, what's going to happen if he doesn't get a job? Nothing. Are his parents going to kick him out? Are his parents? Do the parents need him to make money?
We don't know what the consequences
right.
are.
There's no consequences.
Besides his father being angry.
Yeah.
Right. But
There's an internal pressure. He has to get a job to please his father, which is really what he's trying to explain in the beginning here. I suggested he read The Great Santini by Pat Conroy.
excellent book.
Which is exactly what this kid's going through.
Pat
Father,
Conroy.
Pat Conroy, Great Santini. Kid witnessing his father being miserable because he doesn't have a war to fight, so he's fighting it with his family. And this sounds, I was uncomfortable, and I found that deadness scene very compelling. Dad is just putting his thumb on the kid, and there's nothing. I think that if the kid came home and said he got a professorship at the college, the father would still be angry because he didn't get the directorship.
Right.
It's one of those, the father cannot be pleased. He says that a couple of times. I don't think it's necessary to say that his father will not be pleased because the dialogue handles that pressure. I suggested, I don't know what page it is on yours, but the whole, in mine, I embed comments into so I don't know what page it is on yours. But the whole, for me, the first 2 or 3 pages was unnecessary. Figure out what is the story about. The story is about the kid not being able to get a job under the scrutiny of his father. And he's already failed before in school with getting terrible grades. That, to me, is the real story. There's no mention, I don't want to take up too much time, but there's no mention of the girl in the summary. There's nothing there. Now, I can live with that because what he's doing is he's setting up the need for a soft shoulder to lean on. And that will come in, I'm assuming, later on. But when he says the roller coaster, is it going to be a comfortable landing with her, or is it going to be another case of another father figure pressuring? I don't know. But I think this has a wonderful structure. Once you figure out what the story's about, where are you going with the story, who's the story about, and it's about the kid. But it has nothing to do with other people looking for jobs on the Cape. That's amorphous.
Yeah.
That's nowhere.
One thing I wanted to point out, I mean, I would bet money that this is based on real life events.
Yes.
That this is based on things that actually happen. And I think the author feels compelled to include details that are not
Meaningful to
necessary
him.
for the, I mean, they actually happened, but I don't
so
know that
what?
they're
They don't
important for
move the
the,
story.
exactly. Like the visit, going to the playhouse where there's nobody there.
What's the point?
Why-
Yeah.
Going home
Yes.
and there's nobody there.
Yeah.
It's
Well,
like,
yeah.
so far we have two things that are non-occurrences.
That's right.
That whole,
That might
I'm
be what
sorry.
actually occurred, but as far as the story goes, it's unnecessary. So I think you
a
have to
good
think in
point.
terms of, this is a novel. This is not a memoir. And in a novel, you have to have pertinent details. Okay, not just what really did happen, but details that are pertinent to the story and that kind of move things along.
Go ahead.
No.
I've dominated so far, I don't want to.
Well, I want to say I agree with Dave.
I'm leaving.
I know it's scary. Your work is
done.
done. I
I'm
agree
done
with
here.
Dave that I would skip the first few pages and I would start on 4. I pulled into my parents' driveway just as the last of the afternoon light began to fade. Talked about his job applications and his failures or his lack of information. Have him interact with his family over dinner. And although there's some nice writing, we all agree there's some nice writing at the start, I would get rid of a lot of it or push it to later. And I do want to say, very true. The first paragraph is so true about all those kids cramming themselves into houses to save money.
a
But it
swarm.
read like, it sounded like a 1970s school film about, I don't know, each winter monarch
Documentary or
butterflies
something.
migrate 3,000 miles south. Each spring,
National
thousands of
Geographic.
college students that have the black and white film in the background, and no offense, but I do like ravenous gulls diving into a bait ball. That's
I
a
liked
beautiful
that,
phrase.
yeah.
Don't get rid of that.
Yeah.
And yet I would cut a lot of it. The
That
times.
could be the tourists.
Yes,
Right.
yes, in their seersucker suits. And down the bottom of one, in May 1990, you can insert that timestamp elsewhere. Actually, he mentions 1990 elsewhere. So there's some repetition. There's certainly a thing.
Also, I wonder if it's necessary to peg this in a year, because I mean,
Again, it's
just
personal
thinking
to
about
him.
exactly thinking about a market, an eventual publication of this. They don't want a book that's set in 1990.
Yeah,
They
dated.
want today.
Yeah.
That's true.
Well, I think he's
They want-
connected to the recession also.
Oh, well, there's more than one.
There's always
It
a
doesn't even
recession.
matter.
This one
It could
last
be
year.
The
Yeah.
latest
Right.
recession.
There's always a
Yes,
recession.
yes.
So,
That's right.
it-
Tell me,
Yeah.
what did you think of, when he first gets home and his younger brother is saying what's going on with Dad, and then he turns to his brother and says, "I'm trying, Vinny, I really am." Why
Yeah,
does
I
he
just think
care?
the answer
I
to
cut
his
that.
younger
I
younger
crossed
brother.
that out.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
I thought
Because
that
he says
too.
it later to his father at the table.
But that's who he should care about.
Right.
What does he care what his younger brother thinks of him?
Yeah.
Maybe he cares a little bit, but who's he trying to explain it to?
Right, it's
So,
not accountable to him.
no, maybe if we start there, I'll have a little bit more of a feeling for him if we start with that scene. And then maybe when he's searching after that, it'll be even more meaningful, because now we're with him, we know that his father's a jerk, and when he's going to look for a job, maybe it can be a step-by-step play.
Yeah.
You need a lot more step-by-step play in here. I just don't feel like I know this character well enough yet.
Did anybody else have trouble with, he returned home and then something happened?
Yes,
And then
he
was,
left.
then the supper, and then the brother came. I didn't know when we were in the story. The linear procession of activities once he pulled into the empty driveway. Now, somebody said that it was not necessary to know that the house was empty. If it means something, that he was relieved to go to an empty house,
Oh,
that
that's
means
different.
something. But he's
Yeah.
got to tell us.
Yeah, exactly.
He's going to tell us that.
Dave, I'm about to fall off my stool because I agree with you again.
Oh,
On page
I'm
2.
done.
Why does he go home? Why does he go home to an empty house and make a sandwich? I suggest
Right.
that he goes to the corner cup and he gets a half sandwich, something cheap, half sandwich and coffee, and he observes the people. He tells us about the year-rounders. He tells us about the retired neighbors there. He
Only if they're
explains them.
significant.
Exactly.
That's
Oh,
right.
exactly.
You
But
still
there's
don't
no
want
reason
too
to
much
go home and then.
observing.
Yeah.
It's still too much
Right.
observing.
But I think you're right. I
right?
think at home, when the father's home is a place of tension, and it's never a safe haven, that
That's right.
him going
Yes.
home purposefully when he knows his parents are still at work and he knows his brother is still
Relieved.
at school,
Yeah.
and just being able to have
Yeah.
an hour of
But
safe
like you said, he has to tell
home.
us that.
Yes.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. And then we have the necessity of the girlfriend. Because the house is so uncomfortable, the girlfriend is going to be this, again, the soft landing. Maybe bring that in a little sooner, or have him mention there's a need for someplace else. I gotta find another place to go, because Dad is miserable and Mom is praying, and the brother is a pain in the butt. So
That's
Yes.
true. It kind of set us up somewhat for
Yes.
what's to come. I
Yes.
mean, obviously he hasn't met her yet.
Right.
So, you
Yeah,
know.
but if he falls in love and decides not to get a job, that could be a source.
Oh,
Right,
oh,
so that could be
Yeah.
why
Well, to set the father up.
setup. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So-
Jen's very good at predicting
think
story
I was-
endings, so.
I think I
bank
was
on
still
that.
a little confused too about maybe what year he was in, and was he still failing? Or was he doing better now? I wasn't
Oh,
sure.
in school?
Well, he's
Yeah.
in his last
He
year of
just-
college,
Yeah.
right?
So it was when
he
he
failed
first
his
started,
freshman
right?
year,
Yeah.
but he's still in. So I'm assuming
Something like
he's
that.
Yeah, he thought he was
Okay.
he was going in 2 days a week, and he took 5 courses. And he failed miserably because he was trying to work those other days.
Right.
Yep.
Okay.
So one-
Dad never let him forget about that, the
Right.
failures.
What else?
One other thing, I mean, you know, as he goes on with this, I mean, we're all from the area of Cape Cod, so we know all of the geographical references. Most readers are not. So, you know, the geography has to be straightened out and made relevant.
How far away from...
Exactly.
Yes.
How far away things are, what's between what and what, and significance of them. You know, it's
Okay,
like-
I think we should talk about the positives here. I mean, there are lots of hiccups here,
yeah.
but I think there's an awful lot that's positive about the story. For me, the conversation at the dinner table between the kid and Dad highlighted, unnecessary to describe it.
Yeah.
The conversation was sufficient for me to feel uncomfortable.
Yeah.
And if the reader's feeling
It's
uncomfortable, it's painful, and he should
good.
continue with that.
Yeah. The writing is clear.
Yeah.
He has some
Yes.
excellent word choices in
Yes.
here. I mean, I kept hitting things and it's like, wow, that's a great way to phrase
Yep.
this.
I agree.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's a lot to work with here.
Yeah.
Anything else anyone wants to bring up?
My work here is done.
Okay, well, Chris, thank you so much for submitting. We all enjoyed reading your story, and we hope that our critique today helped you. Please also keep in mind that each one of us has marked up the pages, and they're also on the website right beneath the video of our critique. So thank you for joining us. Thank you, everyone else, and we'll see you for the next edition of Writers Infusion. Keep writing.
No kidding, the stuff is...